I'm Brenda. Welcome back to my quilt room. Today, what I'm going to call this is a gift in a day. Behind me, you will see a small baby quilt. And even if you're new to sewing, I want you to realize that a pattern doesn't have to be difficult in order to be really adorable. And if you can sew a straight line, I'm going to show you how you can make the quilt behind me and another one in practically one day. A lot of times it's nice to give somebody something personal. And maybe you think, well, I can't do that, but I'm going to show you how. Today, this quilt behind me is called Hugs and Kisses. And as you can see, it's because there's an X and an O. And when we used to do a lot of letter writing, and maybe people don't do that anymore or send cards, they used to sometimes put X's and O's at the bottom, and that stood for kisses and hugs. Now this block is simply a 6-inch square of fabric. And that's all you're going to use to make this quilt. And what you will do is you will take each of your 6-inch squares that I'm going to show you. Here's the 6-inch square. And then what we're going to do is take a 3-inch square, and this is referred to as snowballing the corners. And so what you will do is take a 3-inch square and lay it on the edge of the block. Now, where you can see where I have stitched diagonally from corner to corner on each of these, and you can stitch along that line, and then you're going to take your scissors or your rotary cutter and you're going to trim away the excess, just like we've done here. Now I drew this line on here to show you that if you want to, instead of throwing this piece of fabric away, if you want to take a ruler, because some people like to save every scrap of fabric that they have, and you can measure, if you put your line on your stitch line, you can draw a 1/2 inch away, and you could stitch on that line and then cut between these two lines. And you can save these half square triangles and you could use them in another project. I don't like to do a lot of teeny tiny sewing, but some of you may enjoy that and find it relaxing. So that's just a nice way to save up some of your scraps and have them all ready for another project. So we're going to go ahead and cut these two pieces off. So I'm just going to cut about 1/4 inch away from the edge where I've sewn. And all you really are going to do is fold these back, and I'm not going to press them with an iron, and I'm going to explain why. And then really the whole trick to this quilt behind me is the layout of the squares. When you stitch your blocks together, it's simply the way you're going to turn them. If you turn them with your snowballed corners all to the center, it's going to make the O. Now when you go to make the X, you will simply turn them the opposite direction, where the colored points are in the middle. And then you have the X. And that's really all the sewing that there is to this. It takes 4 to make a block. Now I previously made one of these last year. We had a great nephew who was being born in November, and so I thought that this would be a really cute quilt for him, and I made it all scrappy. So these didn't even match, but yet they were still in the shape of an X and an O. I had so many squares and triangles left over that I saved them, and as it turns out, I needed them to make another baby quilt, and I needed one pretty quickly. So I literally was able to sew this together in a day. Now I have another quilt. To explain a little bit more on this one, on the edge, I did put some borders out here. This was a 2-inch border, and I believe this one was a 2.5-inch border. Basically, it took 4 yards of fabric to make this quilt. And this quilt, the second quilt that I made, took 4 yards of fabric. Now that includes the borders as well, and the binding on the quilt. This one has such rich colors of blue that typically I am not a pre-washer of fabric. Now there's a big debate. Should you always pre-wash your fabric? Should you not pre-wash your fabric? Typically I do not, but there are some colors that may bleed when you wash them, and blue and red would be 2 of those colors. So I use this product, and it's called a color catcher. And there are these little sheets of paper, and what you do, you throw them into your washing machine when you're going to pre-wash your fabric. And mine, I pre-washed my blue fabric just because, you know, I figure it's being used for a baby. It's probably going to go through the laundry, and I didn't want the white color to come out faded blue. And so I threw one of these in with the fabric, and I pre-washed it before I cut it. So for the second quilt, these are 4 different fabrics, and they are, I cut them into 3¼ inch by 6 inch rectangles. And then I simply sewed the 2 rectangles together, the 2 fabrics that I liked, and they came out 6 inches. And then I will simply continue to sew them together. And I used 4 of these to make 1 block in this quilt. And I simply followed the same pattern all the way across. You can see I used white and blue, gray and blue. And those are the 4 blocks that I used to make this quilt. And so I set them 4 blocks across and 4 blocks down, and then added my borders. Now when I cut up my fabric, I didn't know exactly how big this quilt was going to come out because I didn't have a pattern. And so I was trying to be conservative when I cut it, cutting only as many strips as I thought I would need. That way I had fabric left over to make my borders and my binding. As it turns out, I actually had a few blocks left over. And so I went ahead and made this little pillow out of my leftover fabric. When you have a little one and you're doing a lot of feeding, at least from what I recall, is that your arms do get tired, and sometimes it's nice just to have a nice little pillow to put underneath your elbow while you're feeding the baby. So I think that they'll enjoy that. In my last video, we talked a little bit about labeling, and then things come to mind and I'm like, why didn't I tell them this, or why didn't I tell them that? So today I'm going to show you, here are some pins, and these are micron pins. You can get them up, pick them up in your fabric stores, at craft stores. They come in a variety of different colors. So if you're going to make a label, say you want to make a label for your gift that you're going to give at the shower or to the expectant parents, it doesn't have to be made with a printer like I printed on fabric. You can take a piece of fabric from your, out of your, what you're using to make your gift, and you can write on those. These are labels that are put on with heat bond, and so you will just have to peel the paper off the back, and then you can press this on, and you could do a little light stitching around it. You could use the shape of a teddy bear, a heart, you know, a rabbit, whatever maybe their favorite little thing would be. So that, and you can write on it with these pens. These are actually Sharpie pens that are permanent. A friend of mine actually just signs her quilts on the back, right on the back of the quilt, with a Sharpie pen with their name and the date that they made it. It is a nice remembrance to have that on there when you give somebody something, so they know when it was made and who it was made by. Maybe you want to tuck a label into the corner of the quilt in the binding. I try to keep all of my leftover fabrics organized, and so I use these containers, and I have several of them, and they're all marked in different sizes of squares and strips, so that when I need something, I can quickly just go there and grab it. You can use a Sharpie pen and mark on a piece of fabric, and you can fold it over, and you could sew this right into the edge of your quilt binding in the back. You know, turn your edges under and stitch that down. That's just another idea of what you can do to label a quilt. If you don't have heat and bond, you could use some tacky glue to hold it securely on there. So these are just two really nice projects that you can get out of 4 yards of fabric. That just includes the top. It doesn't include the backing. And maybe you've just started quilting and you have 1/4 yards of fabric. Maybe you're new and you don't know what is a 1/4 yard of a fabric. What is a fat quarter? A fat quarter of fabric is 1/4 of a yard. And as you can see here, it measures on the 18-inch line to about 22 inches. This one's about 21.5. And it may press out, you know, they come folded up, usually with a little piece of cardboard in the middle. You can press that out, and you could get, I measured out of a fat quarter for this project, you can get 9 6x6 squares. And then if you were going to use, if you wanted the other pattern, then you should be able to get out of a yard, it looks like 66 of the 3 1/4 by 6 inch. So if you divided that by 4, that would be approximately how many of those you could get out of a fat quarter. But these are just really nice to have if you want a variety of fabrics without buying an entire yard of something that you're not sure that you might use in the future. So those are just a few ideas that I've had on making a quick gift for somebody. These came out to be 50 inches by 50 inches. And I think they're just adorable. You can either pre-wash or not pre-wash your gift. On the second quilt here, I did go ahead and pre-wash just because, like I said, the blues were such rich colors. And a lot of people really like this crinkly, you know, comfortable look of a quilt after it's gone through the washing machine, and it softens up the fabrics, and hopefully it will be used quite a lot, and it'll probably have many more washings after the first one that I gave it. So I hope that you enjoy this video. If you like my videos, I appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you.